I was standing on the deck of a chartered boat in Muskoka when my phone buzzed against the wooden railing, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Get off the boat. Don't tell your father anything. Don't sign whatever he gives you." I had no idea that the folder my stepmother was about to slide across the dinner table that night was designed to strip me of $14 million, or that by sunrise I'd be sitting in an RCMP financial crimes office in downtown Toronto, unraveling a lie my family had been building for 25 years. My name is Charlotte. I'm 31, and I work as a chartered professional accountant doing forensic audits for a firm on Bay Street. I spend my days finding the money people try to hide. It never crossed my mind that I'd need those skills on my own father. The weekend had started like every other forced family gathering since I was a kid. My father Edmund and my stepmother Vivienne had rented a boat for 2 days to celebrate my younger half-sister Annika's engagement to some hedge fund guy named Trent. We were anchored near a private island, string lights wrapped around the railing, a caterer plating salmon under a tent. I sat near the end of the table, the way I always did, cutting into my fish, used to being the part of the family nobody photographed. My stepmother had her wine glass halfway to her mouth when she looked over at me with that particular tilt of her head she reserved for me alone. "You really should loosen up, Charlotte," she said, loud enough that the caterer glanced over. "You spend your whole life buried in spreadsheets. No wonder you're still single. Maybe you could ask Annika for some pointers now that she's marrying into actual money." Annika laughed without looking up from her phone. "Don't be mean, Mom. Someone has to do the boring stuff. We need people like Charlotte to keep the books balanced." I'd learned a long time ago that reacting only fed them, so I gave a tight smile and kept eating. I just wanted to get through the weekend and fly back to my condo in Toronto, where nobody made me feel like a line item. That's when my father cleared his throat and reached into the leather bag at his feet. He pulled out a stack of papers and a pen and slid it across the white tablecloth until it touched my plate. "Since we're all here, let's get this housekeeping done," he said, in the same smooth voice he used closing real estate deals. "Standard family tax form. My accountant needs it signed by everyone before the end of the quarter so Annika's wedding trust can clear without a tax hit. Just initial the yellow tabs and we can order dessert." I looked down at the papers. Something cold moved through my stomach. In my line of work, standard tax form usually meant someone was hiding something. I pulled the folder toward me instead of reaching for the pen. "What exactly is this for?" I asked, flipping past the cover page. Vivienne sighed theatrically. "Honestly, Charlotte, must you make everything difficult? Your father's handling a transition for the family. Just sign so we can celebrate your sister." I ignored her and kept reading. My eyes moved fast over the dense legal language, the part of my brain trained to catch inconsistencies lighting up immediately. This wasn't a CRA form. There were no tax schedules attached. But certain phrases jumped out: irrevocable waiver, full release of beneficiary interest, indemnification from prior fiduciary obligations. "Dad, this isn't a tax document," I said, looking up. My voice stayed level even though my heart had started hammering. "This reads like a release from a trust or some kind of guardianship arrangement. I'm not signing this until I've read every page." The temperature at the table dropped. My father's easy smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. Annika set her fork down with a clack. "This is exactly why nobody wants you around," she snapped. "You're so paranoid. Dad's just trying to protect my wedding fund and you're acting like he's robbing you. You don't even have any money worth stealing. You're a glorified bookkeeper." My father leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Charlotte, you're embarrassing me in front of the caterers. I flew you up here, I paid for your cabin, and I'm asking for one signature to help your sister. Are you really going to be this selfish?" For one breath, the part of me that was still 11 years old wanted to just sign it, to make the air stop feeling like it might crack. But the 31-year-old forensic accountant in me knew better. The gap between what they were telling me this document was and what it actually said was enormous. "I need a minute," I said, standing. "I'll look at it properly when I get back." I walked off toward the cabin below deck, feeling their eyes on my back the whole way. The second I was through the door, I locked it and pressed my palms flat against the cool wood, breathing. Why would my father need me to release beneficiary interest in anything? My biological mother had died of cancer when I was 2. I'd always been told she'd left nothing behind but medical debt. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a number I didn't know: "Get off the boat. Don't tell your father anything. Don't sign it." A chill went through me. I typed back asking who this was. The message failed to send, the number was blocked. I stood there in that tiny cabin bathroom, feeling pieces of a puzzle I didn't know existed start clicking together. The surprise trip, the pressure to sign without reading, the very specific legal language. I was being set up and I didn't yet know by how much, but every instinct in my body said if I signed that paper, my life as I knew it was over. I wasn't going back to that table. I changed out of my dress into leggings and a hoodie, shoved my passport and wallet into my bag, and peered out the cabin door. The hallway was empty, but I knew Vivienne wouldn't let me out of her sight for long. I clutched my stomach, doubled over, and stumbled back up to the deck. "Dad," I gasped, leaning on a chair. "Something's wrong. I think it was the salmon. I need to lie down." Anaka recoiled, pulling her dress away from me like I might be contagious. "Oh my God, get away from the table, you're ruining everything." My father stood, jaw tight. "Charlotte, stop being dramatic. Sit down and sign the form." I dry heaved convincingly enough that even Vivienne stepped back. "I can't. I need to lie down right now." Before my father could grab my arm, I turned and half ran toward the lower deck, hearing Vivienne's sandals slapping the fiberglass behind me. I didn't stop until I was inside the cabin, with the door locked and the porthole curtain drawn. I waited until the boat noise settled, until I heard my father's voice carrying faintly from the upper deck, arguing with the caterer about timing, and then I moved. There was a small tender tied off at the swim platform, the kind the crew used to ferry guests to shore. I'd watched the deckhand operate it twice that weekend. I climbed down as quietly as I could, untied the line with shaking hands, and started the little outboard motor, praying the sound would get lost in the music still playing up top. I pointed it toward the marina lights in the distance and didn't look back once. By the time I reached the dock, my phone was lit up with messages. "Vivienne, you're acting like a child. Get back here now." "Annika, you're ruining my engagement weekend. I hope you're happy." "My father, the marina staff are looking for the tender. If you're playing games, you will regret this." I read them with the cold, analytical eye of someone who audits liars for a living. This wasn't normal anger over a ruined family weekend. This was panic. Whatever deadline they were racing against was real, and whatever they were trying to take from me was enormous. I powered my phone off completely and called a cab from a payphone outside the marina convenience store, the kind that still somehow existed in cottage country. The drive to the small regional airport took 40 minutes. I paid cash for the last seat on a puddle jumper down to Toronto, sank into the window seat, and watched the lake disappear beneath the clouds, my pulse finally slowing. When we landed at Pearson, I turned my phone back on, braced for a flood of furious voicemails. Instead, there was a single text from the same unknown number. "I'm waiting at the arrival's doors with someone from the RCMP." I walked off the jet bridge on legs that didn't quite feel like mine. Near the arrival's exit stood two men in plain dark suits and, between them, someone I recognized instantly. Marcus, my brother-in-law, Annika's husband, the quiet structural engineer who'd married into our family 2 years earlier. My family loved parading him around at the country club like a trophy of how progressive they were, while treating him, behind closed doors, like hired help with a wedding ring. "I sent the text," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, exhaustion carved into his face. "I'm done being a prop for people who think being polite to my face makes up for what they actually are. I found something at the house, something that changes everything. I brought it straight to the people who can do something about it." One of the suited men opened his jacket just enough to flash a badge. "Constable Whitfield, RCMP Financial Crimes." The older man beside him extended a hand. "Arthur Pemberton, I'm an estates and trusts litigator. We need to talk somewhere private." They led us through a restricted door, down a service corridor, into a small soundproofed lounge that smelled like stale coffee and hand sanitizer. I sat on a vinyl couch. Marcus sat across from me, jaw tight. Pemberton set a thick folder on the table between us. "Charlotte," he said, his tone clinical, "you spend your career uncovering paper trails. Today we're going to look at yours. I need you to prepare yourself. Almost everything you believe about your childhood is a carefully constructed legal fiction." I crossed my arms. "I know exactly who my family is. They've made that clear my whole life." "You weren't sent to boarding school at 11 as punishment," Pemberton said quietly. "You were sent away because your absence and a fabricated incident were required for a court filing. Your father didn't just send you away. He used a false accusation that you'd shoved your stepsister down a staircase to petition a judge for a permanent guardianship arrangement over your affairs. He declared you a danger to yourself and stripped away your legal independence, quietly on paper, while you were a child who had no idea any of it was happening. The air left my lungs. A guardianship. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Over what? My mother left nothing. That's what I was always told. Pemberton slid a document across the table, a patent registration, my mother's name typed neatly at the top, dated the year before she died. Eleanor? No, I caught myself. Her name was Margaret, my mother, Margaret Voss, a software engineer who'd built early inventory tracking technology for logistics companies before anyone understood what it would become. She'd filed the patent quietly, signed the licensing rights into a trust for me before the cancer took her, and named my father as the sole trustee until I turned 30. That patent has been licensed to a dozen major logistics firms over the last 2 decades, Pemberton said. The royalties, reinvested properly, are worth just over $14 million today. Your father has controlled every cent of it since you were 2 years old. And in 11 months, on your 32nd birthday, the trust was set to dissolve automatically, and the entire balance would transfer directly to you, with full visibility into every transaction he'd ever made against it. I sat very still. So he needed me declared incompetent. He needed a guardianship to keep control past my 32nd birthday. That and more, Pemberton said. He's been borrowing against the trust for 15 years to fund failed real estate ventures, your stepmother's boutique, your sister's jewelry line. The fund is down to roughly $6 million from what should be closer to 20. He's been quietly trying to replace what he took before the dissolution date, and he's run out of time and out of his own money. The document on that boat tonight wasn't a tax form. It was a full release, you willingly signing away any claim to the trust and any right to an accounting of it, framed as a wedding gift to your sister so you'd sign it without a lawyer present. I thought about Vivienne's voice at the table, just initial the yellow tabs, and felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. Marcus spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. I found the paperwork by accident looking for a router cable in my father-in-law's home office 2 weeks ago. A folder labeled C Trust Restructuring. I didn't understand half of it, but I understood enough to know it wasn't right. I've spent 2 years watching them treat you like an inconvenience at every holiday, watching them make jokes about your job in front of clients, and I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. But when I found out what they were planning to do to you the same week they were renting a $14,000 boat to celebrate Annika, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I called Pemberton's office before I even told my wife I'd found anything. Constable Whitfield leaned forward. We've had an open file on your father's primary numbered company for 8 months, related to an unrelated fraud complaint from one of his investors. When Mr. Marcus came to us with the trust documents, the pieces lined up. We have enough for a warrant on the trust accounts, but we need one more thing, proof that he's actively trying to extinguish your beneficiary rights through coercion. We need him to try to get your signature on tape. You want me to go back, I said. We want you to let him think he won, Pemberton said. If we move now with an injunction, he'll see it coming and shift whatever's left of the fund into accounts we can't touch before a judge even looks at the paperwork. We need him comfortable, arrogant, convinced this is already over. I sat with that for a long moment, looking at the patent document with my mother's signature on it, a woman I barely remembered except as a single photograph on my dresser. Then I looked up. Tell me what you need me to do. What they needed was for me to call my father and sound exactly like the version of me he'd built his whole plan around. Scared, broke, desperate to avoid another lawsuit. I sat in a small interview room at the RCMP building 2 days later, drank 2 coffees on an empty stomach to make my hands shake, and called him at 9 in the morning, when I knew he'd be in his home office feeling untouchable. He answered on the second ring and didn't say hello, just my name, dripping with that particular condescension he saved only for me. Dad, please, I said, letting my voice crack, pitching it higher, the way I used to sound at 11 the night before they sent me away. Please don't sue me, I can't afford a lawyer. I can barely make my condo payments. I'll do whatever you want, just tell me what you need. His laugh through the phone made my skin crawl, low and satisfied. He loved this. He loved hearing me beg. You brought this on yourself, Charlotte. Your independence has always been an illusion. Your compliance is the only thing standing between you and complete financial ruin. You'll be at Pemberton's office. No, at Donovan Reyes's notary office downtown, Friday at 4. You'll sit down, you'll keep your mouth shut, and you'll sign the release. Are we clear? Yes, I sobbed perfectly. Yes, Dad. I'm sorry, I'll be there. When the call disconnected, my tears vanished instantly. My pulse slowed. I looked up at the two-way mirror on the wall and nodded once. The bait was set and he'd swallowed it whole. On Wednesday, I sat in Pemberton's downtown office while he spread a series of documents across a mahogany table, Constable Whitfield leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. We weren't going to file an injunction before Friday. Too predictable, too easy for my father to see coming. Instead, Pemberton had reverse-engineered an exact replica of the release Donovan Reyes planned to use. Same letterhead, same formatting, same notary stamp placement, visually identical. The text inside was completely different. Instead of a release of beneficiary interest, it was a full forensic audit authorization, granting me, as the trust's primary beneficiary, immediate legal authority to freeze and examine every account connected to my father, Vivian, and the numbered companies tied to the trust. How do I swap them in front of him without anyone noticing? I asked, studying the counterfeit document. My father will be watching every move I make. Vivian will be standing over my shoulder. They won't let me bring my own paperwork in, and they definitely won't let me leave with theirs. Pemberton slid a leather portfolio across the table, identical to the one I always carried to client meetings. The moment you sit down, you'll ask for a bathroom break before signing, the way you would with any document you take seriously. The notary's office has a private washroom adjoining the conference room. Constable Whitfield will be posing as a building maintenance worker in the hallway. The swap happens there, 30 seconds, document for document. You walk back out, you sign what you believe is their release, in full view of everyone, with the original, their actual fraudulent release, left untouched and unsigned, hidden in your bag. The one you sign and hand back to them is ours. It took us 2 days to rehearse the timing down to the second. Friday afternoon, I walked into Donovan Reyes's notary office in a charcoal blazer, my hands steady in a way they hadn't been in 20 years. My father was already seated, Vivian beside him in a cream suit. Anika, scrolling her phone in the corner like this, was an inconvenience squeezed between brunch and a dress fitting. "Glad you came to your senses," my father said, not bothering to stand. I sat across from him, set my portfolio on the table, and asked Donovan, a thin man with nervous eyes who clearly knew exactly what kind of document he was notarizing, if I could use the washroom before signing. My father's jaw tightened, but he waved a hand. "Make it quick." In the washroom, the swap took 11 seconds. I came back out, sat down, uncapped the pen, and signed my name on what my father believed was a complete surrender of $14 million. He watched me sign with the particular satisfaction of a man who'd just won a war he didn't know he'd already lost. Donovan stamped it, notarized it, and slid it into his briefcase, the genuine fraudulent release still folded, untouched, in my bag. "Was that so hard?" Vivian said almost gently, like she'd won something kind. I smiled at her. "Not at all." I excused myself before dessert was even mentioned, walked out to the parking garage, and got into Constable Whitfield's unmarked car. By the time I closed the door, my hands were shaking again, but this time from something closer to relief. The warrant moved within 6 hours. By Saturday morning, every account tied to the trust, my father's numbered company, and 2 shell accounts in Vivienne's name, had been frozen pending a full forensic audit, conducted as it turned out, primarily by me, with RCMP oversight and Pemberton's firm running point on the legal side. It took 11 weeks to trace everything: the failed real estate ventures, the boutique that had never once turned a profit, $250,000 that had moved through Annika's jewelry company in payments that didn't match any actual jewelry. That last thread was the one that broke something in Marcus. He found it himself, actually, sitting beside me at a folding table in Pemberton's back office one evening, going through transaction logs because he'd insisted on helping however he could. A wire transfer, $50,000, dated 3 months earlier, routed not from my father's account but from a high-interest savings account registered in Annika's name. Marcus went very still. "That's our son's education fund," he said. "I opened that account the week he was born. I've been putting money into it for 4 years out of my own salary, so he'd never have to take out a loan the way I did. We traced it together. Annika had drained it to cover a payment to Donovan Reyes. Not for notary fees, but for something closer to a retainer, the kind of money that keeps a willing professional quiet and cooperative. She'd taken from her own 4-year-old son to keep my father's scheme moving, because the trust accounts she usually pulled from were already nearly empty. I watched something behind Marcus's eyes go cold and final. He didn't say much. He stood up, walked to the window, and stood there a long time with his back to me. "Tell me what you need," he said eventually, and I'll give it to you. The full picture came together over the following months. My father pled out rather than face trial, on fraud and breach of fiduciary duty charges, agreeing to full restitution from whatever remained of his assets in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months, most of it likely served at a minimum security facility outside Kingston. Vivian's boutique was liquidated. Annika was never charged criminally. The wire transfer from her own account technically made her a victim on paper, even though everyone in that room knew exactly what she'd known and when. Marcus filed for divorce within the month. He got primary custody of their son without much of a fight, mostly because Annika, when it came down to it, didn't fight very hard. The trust itself was restored as much as it could be, just over $9 million once the remaining real estate was liquidated, and the restitution orders started coming through, less than what should have been there, but more than enough. I used part of it to set up an education fund of my own, not for myself but for my nephew, structured so that no single person could ever touch it without 3 independent signatures, mine included but never mine alone. I bought a small house outside Collingwood, not the kind of place built to impress anyone, just somewhere with big windows and a view of the escarpment, close enough to the city for work, far enough to feel like I'd actually left some behind. On a Sunday morning a few months after everything had settled, I made coffee and sat on my back porch with my mug, looking at a small framed photo I'd had restored. My mother, young, sitting in front of an old beige computer monitor, grinning like she knew something the rest of us hadn't figured out yet. I thought about how she'd spent the last year of her life quietly building something to protect a daughter she knew she wouldn't get to raise, and how my father had spent 25 years trying to twist that gift into a weapon against me, and how, in the end, he'd failed. I'd taken back what was hers, what was mine, and I'd done it the way she would have. Carefully, on paper, without raising my voice once. The anxious, watchful kid who used to brace for the next cruel comment at every family dinner finally felt like she could breathe. I didn't have to read the room anymore, didn't have to brace for the next slight disguised as a joke. I leaned back, watched the morning light move across the hills, and understood, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't the one who'd lost anything that mattered. Family was never about who shared your blood. It was about who showed up when it cost them something to do it. And Marcus had shown up and stayed, and that was the only inheritance that ever actually meant something.